Everybody uses buildings. So everyone lives in a building apart from the unfortunate small proportion of people who live on the street and don't have a home, but the vast majority of people live in some sort of building. You can't conduct any economic or social activity, a school, a hospital, a business, a shop, et cetera, a government regulator, without being in buildings. Now, our strategy as a regulator is called One Planet Prosperity. And it's based on a very simple bit of science. So we've got 2 laboratories. We've retained about 300 scientists. A lot of EPAs have downgraded their scientific work over the years. We've really invested in it, and they do incredibly technical work. But there's a very simple bit of global science which says if everyone in the world lived like we do here in Scotland or the UK, we would need 3 planets. Now, the country I come from, I think it's now 5 planets. There are some in the Middle East that are up around 8 or 9, and there are some countries that are below 1. Humanity uses about 1.5 planets. And the only time in the last 40 years it's gone in the right direction was last year, and that was solely because of COVID. But it only went back about 3 weeks, and this year it's already, even though we're still, to some degree, living in very changed situations, it's gone back to where it was. I think it was the 29th of July was what's called Earth Overshoot Day, which is where the Global Footprint Network in California estimates humanity has used up what the planet can support in a year. Now, if you think in a business, if you said last year costs were 3 times revenue, and it was the same year before that, and the year before that, and it's going in the wrong direction every year, would you say, you know, your 2-day management love-in, oh, gee, we better have a 5% surge in sales or a 3% productivity cost? No, you'd say your business model is bust and it's an existential threat and you need to fundamentally change or you'll be out of business. That's why people are meeting in Glasgow. Humanity's business model is bust. We cannot go on like this. That's just the simple science. That's not being melodramatic, it's not being alarmist, it's the science. Now, when you overuse any system, we know, like, your body's a system, and if you're overweight, which unfortunately I am, your body hits back in certain ways. You're more tired. I have bad back pain, and it's made worse because I'm starting to try to lose weight, but I never had too much success. All systems hit back when you overuse them. The planet's hitting back because it's changing our climate, and there are other impacts of the planet hitting back. Now, it's just a fact. It doesn't mean be dismal, it doesn't mean be optimistic, it just is. So what is the one thing that we need to do to change that? More than anything, it's innovation. That's why this centre is so important, because incremental improvement will not get us out of the situation we're in. Now, we have 6 what are called organisational characteristics. They're a little bit like values, but they're a bit different. And, oh, this is embarrassing, number 2 or 3 says we will take incremental gain, but actually what we need is to support step change. And we need to support step change in this industry, and this centre is doing that. And critically, from our point of view, I mean, it's not our job to help businesses make money. You know, our job is to make sure they comply with the law, but that'll probably only get us to 2.6 or 2.7 planets. It does a lot of local environmental protection. Out in the Balfour Beatty spot outside, and the guys taking me through their digital analysis and how they can plan to reduce environmental impact. There's a lot of cost savings in there. There's a lot of business improvement. Now, we will regulate Balfour Beatty and make sure they don't have runoff into waterways from construction activity. And yes, we will do that. SEPA will always do that. And I want us to get tougher and better at enforcement. If the challenge is we've got a decade to not save the planet will be here, the planet will be fine, it'll be very different. A lot of other species will go down with us. It's about whether we exist and is our future prosperous or miserable. And this is the decade where we have to make huge inroads into decarbonising and dematerialising. Now, if we can do that in ways, so again, I go back to the enforcement bit or the compliance bit. If we need massive innovation and we need as many people as possible going beyond the minimum standards that the law requires on the environment, I have to support the people trying to do that. And one of the ways we need to support the people doing that is really hold people to account who can't even meet the basic laws. And in my view, if they can't meet the basic laws repeatedly and regularly, they need to get out of Scotland and we'll shut them down. Now, we don't have to do that very often. I've done it once or twice while I've been here. People really badly breaking laws. Most people don't deliberately do it. Most people just need some help and assistance. But if the help and assistance they need is a whack and is being taken to court, then we need to be good at that and better at that, because Stephen and his team help businesses innovate. Now, what's one thing that always goes with innovation? Risk. The more novel the innovation, the riskier it'll be. The more large scale you make it, the riskier it is. So if you look at that bench over there, Jennifer was showing me earlier, there's various types of materials being turned into insulation product. Now, some of that could have ended up in landfill. So it's come from some sort of production, might get thrown back in the environment. If it can be used, not just used as a production input for something else, but a production input that reduces greenhouse gas emissions because of it insulates, then that's a big benefit. Now, I don't know how new some of those things are, but when they are new, we have to give an approval for whether you can use that waste as a production input. As a regulator, I can't stand here and say to you, our species is in trouble, we've got a decade, we have to massively innovate, we have to support the centre, and as the centre supports businesses and people in supply chains, but you guys take all the risk. We'll just sit here, we'll make it hard for you to get an approval. It'll take 2 years, and we might say yes and put all these constraints on. Now, taking risk, as everybody in business knows, is about taking the right risks, managing the risk, doing it in a way that if what you're trying goes wrong, it doesn't cause huge problems. You can stop, you can refocus, reshift, you do trials and pilots, etc. But managing risk for a regulator is often saying no. And again, I'll be clear, I'm not going to be disingenuous. We will say no sometimes. We absolutely will. What we need to do is be much quicker at saying no, explaining why we say no, working with people of how do we turn the no into a yes so that this material doesn't go to landfill but could go somewhere else. And that's okay, we do that. We've got some really good people who work with businesses on that. But we need to step up and ramp up to do that more and more, because we've only got a decade. And the stuff that we're seeing in here, I came here about 3 years ago. It's really good with COVID because you always know that it's at least about 18 months since you've been somewhere. So, I haven't been here for at least a couple of years. And there's a hell of a lot more stuff here than there was. I was impressed the first time I came. But what you're trying to do here is make whatever is novel, whatever is innovative, whatever is much better, become the norm. And for that norm to then be exceeded by something else and built on, etc. While as a regulator, we've got to keep pace with that. We've got to support it. And we've got to be, as I say, we've got to be better at saying no, but doing it quicker with explanations and then helping the yes. Now, one of our other organisational characteristics, they're really exciting things. Number 6 is nearly everything SEPA will do will be in partnership. So if I ask you a question, probably some of you have never worked with SEPA, you might even know much about who we are, but some of you will have. All the partners you work with, private sector, public sector, third sector, is SEPA the most important partner for you to innovate and be successful? This is the only question, participation partner. It's simply a hands up, a hands down. I suspect I'm only going to have to do part A and not part B. Is SEPA the most important partner that helps you be innovative? I don't have to do the other bit, do I? And that's okay, it's not a competition, like you've got all sorts of organisations that are going to help you be innovative. What I think the test should be, if I came back in a couple of years' time, if you work with SEPA, are we more helpful than we were today? Because that's the challenge for all of us. And the partnerships, quite importantly for us as a regulator, are supply chain partnerships. Because the history of EPAs around the world, Stephen mentioned I've worked in 3, and I've worked with lots of others. We talk about phase 1 of being an environment protection agency. So Melbourne, where I come from, was the 3rd EPA in the world. The first was 67 in Sweden. The second was 69 in the US. Richard Nixon set up the US EPA. The most recent Republican president seemed to have a different view of the environment from President Nixon. And then the state of Victoria set one up. And the state of Victoria set one up because we had terrible urban pollution, because Melbourne was the manufacturing base for Australia and to some degree for Southeast Asia. So the Maribyrnong River, which ran through the industrial west, used to catch on fire. There was one point where you could walk across it. Before I left, you'd walk along and you pretended you didn't live near there when you were a kid. I was from that part of Melbourne. When I left, that side of Melbourne's about 2 million people. The two most expensive streets on that side of Melbourne fronted that river because the EPA, and not just the EPA, with lots of businesses and councils and community groups, had cleaned up the river so much. And people would fish in it and could eat the fish and be okay. That's phase one of being an EPA. All that achievement was really going to each factory and getting them to put more of their materials into their products than back out in the river or the airshed or into solid waste. And we will still do that, but it's not the main game anymore. The main game is how do you take supply chains and value chains and reduce carbon, reduce materials, reduce water use, all these things right through a chain, and this is what the centre does. Partly because when you think about 3 planets to 1, that's a systems problem. You can't solve systems problems by non-integrated interventions at lots of points. We will still have the interventions at lots of points, but under sector plans that we're developing, they'll be much more strategic and focused about helping businesses work within their sector, but also with other sectors. So the whisky industry we regulate the barley growers. Why can't we help them both in their supply chain reduce water use? They both have an interest in it. They can protect themselves from water scarcity, which I have to say as an Australian coming from a drought-prone country with about 75% desert or semi-arid area, I was slightly surprised in my first few weeks to get a briefing, not on flooding, I thought, yeah, that makes sense, but on what we do when we have water scarcity or droughts. I said, really, in Scotland? But we do. And it's becoming more pronounced, particularly in parts of the country that rely on water for those sort of industries. So what I'll finish by saying is, my key messages are, we literally do have an existential threat as a species. As I say, I don't talk about saving the planet. We need to save ourselves because of the damage we're doing to the planet. It's urgent. If we haven't made big inroads, we have to solve everything this decade. But 2030, if we've only made incremental improvements in reducing carbon or incremental improvements of dematerialising, then it's a miserable future we face. So we've got a decade. We can do it. We need to innovate at scale and at pace. We need to take risks. We need to work together to work out how to share those risks and share the rewards of innovation and then help move on to the next phase. And the EPA needs to be tough in Scotland for the people who aren't part of that game and be supportive for the people who are part of that game, which is this centre, all of you and everyone else who works with the centre. And I invite you to hold SEPA to account because I can come along and make what I think is a nice speech, I hope you do. Say some nice words and here's a bit of a challenge for the future. Well, they're just words. As a young Swede would say, they're just blah, blah, blah unless we do it. So it's an invitation to you to hold us to account for the ambition that I'm setting out for SEPA to play our role in the work that we do with the centre and everyone in the industry. So thank you very much.